Coming up, in 2016, an advisory referendum saw a wafer-thin majority of the UK population vote for Brexit. Some voted leave as a protest against Prime Minister David Cameron and the establishment. Others voted for Brexit because they were promised that no one was talking about leaving the single market. Here's the founder of Vote Leave, Daniel Hannan, in 2015.
First of all, absolutely nobody is suggesting that we would give up our position in the free market in Europe.
Brexit voters were voting for many different types of Brexit, but Boris Johnson's Tory government decided to interpret the Brexit result to please the most extreme anti-EU, anti-immigration, insular, xenophobic version. We in Britain had our European citizenship rights taken away from us because of this extreme decision. Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his successors Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak went on to pander to the xenophobic ugliness that Brexit unleashed. And here we are, 8 years on from the referendum, with the far right rioting on our streets, looting shops and damaging the property of the very people they claim to be protecting. So who is really responsible for the ugly racists rioting on our streets? Are they the Brexit riots? The Farage Riots, the Daily Mail riots, the Braverman riots, or the Tommy 10 Names riots? Or perhaps all those and more. Stay tuned. The fascist thugs told us that they had legitimate concerns. They chose to express these by breaking into a hotel housing immigrant families and attempting to set the building on fire while children slept on the floors above. By attacking the police, mosques and private property belonging to local people, both white British people and those of other ethnicities. We live in a parliamentary democracy. Granted, a very flawed one, but legitimate concerns should be expressed via the ballot box or through your MP, not by stealing knockoff Crocs or carrying out a smash and grab on your local Greggs. The general election showed that support for the Reform Party UK Limited Company was limited to 14% of voters. And opinion polls tell us that their support has drastically reduced now they've been associated with the fascist riots, which have followed years of inflammatory rhetoric, both from the Tory government and from Nigel Farage's various Ponzi schemes posing as political parties. And it's been coordinated by keyboard warriors both in Britain and overseas. The spread of misinformation and disinformation on social media is unregulated by legislation in this country, and following the tragic murder of the 3 young girls in Southport, this was the spark that lit the racist fire on the massive pile of wood that the Tories and their client media, and equally Farage, have been building for years now. The likes of Farage, Lee Anderson, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch and other dog-whistling culture warriors sit in our parliament and are all accountable for the violence on our streets. Their number is one less after right-winger and senior Tory Penny Mordaunt was rejected by voters in her constituency after this fascistic display at the last Tory conference.
Stand up and fight. Because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights, the nation stands up and fights. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight.
We've had years of this sort of rhetoric from Tory governments fanning the anti-immigration flames. Now they express shock and condemnation when less well-informed and, let's be honest, stupid people take them at their word. While stupid people and thugs will always be with us, governments can create an environment that tries to dissuade them from doing stupid thuggish things through education and telling the truth about the need for immigration. Or they can create an environment that actively encourages anti-immigrant violence and criminality. We've lived through 14 years of Conservative government that actively encouraged these racist thugs to fight, 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 in the words of Mordaunt, telling stupid people that immigrants, transgender people, Black Lives Matter protesters and retired footballers working as sports presenters were threatening our very way of life. that the overwhelmingly peaceful rallies bringing attention to the genocide in Palestine were actually hate marches, according to Suellen Braverman, wife of self-proclaimed proud Zionist Rael Braverman.
I think I've been pretty clear that these are hate marches.
If she called those peaceful protests hate marches, I wonder what she would call these racist anti-immigrant riots. Well, we'll have to carry on wondering, because as of now, while I record this video, she's kept complete radio silence. Shame, I hope, is keeping her from speaking. The government entirely scrapped its counter-extremism strategy back in 2021. The police kept warning the Tory government that the far right was the fastest growing terrorism threat in the UK, but the government did nothing. Instead, they chose to amplify, misrepresent, and even invent the threat from Islamic extremism. Honest Bob Jenrick, a contender for the Tory leadership, claimed in Parliament that we have allowed our streets to be dominated by Islamist extremists. Other senior Conservatives also smeared the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, claiming he was being controlled by radical Islamists simply because he's a Muslim. Lee Anderson was one of many.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Storm as well.
30p Lee has, of course, since become a Reform UK Party Limited Ponzi scheme MP. Interesting factoid, 20% of Reform Party UK Limited Ponzi scheme MPs have been convicted of violently assaulting a woman. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the violent thug, James McMurdoch. But it's not just the rebranded Brexit Party Limited who lean heavily on culture war themes. The Tories have copied their playbook as a way of distracting voters from their own corruption, high taxes and redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich, and the redistribution of power from renters to landlords and from employees to corporations. Kemi Badenoch seems to be the distractor-in-chief, trying to focus voters' attention on scapegoats like asylum seekers, the transgender community, and even the National Trust. She failed. The electorate realised, despite her confected culture wars, that she and the Tories had nothing to offer the people of the UK except the further enrichment of the richest 1%, the destruction of public services, and a gradual withdrawal of human rights, employment rights, and civil rights. That's why they wanted to invent other scapegoats to deflect anger away from themselves. Asylum seekers were a convenient target. They could be blamed for problems that were entirely of the Tory government's own making. The housing shortage, an NHS at breaking point with record waiting lists, a cost of living crisis with immigrants blamed for driving down wages. And all this while these powerless and vulnerable people, the vast majority escaping conflict or persecution in their home country, have been subject to performative cruelty. The £10 billion batshit crazy Rwanda scheme is a prime example of this. It achieved nothing. It was never about improving the lives of British people. It was all about performative cruelty, directing people's anger away from the Tory government and against asylum seekers. But how did they get away with it? Well, I read the Mail, the Express, and worst of all, the Telegraph as research for these videos. And I can assure you that they, along with GBBs, the Tory-run BBC, and now Sky News, who've recently shifted markedly to the right, they all continue to push that same Tory/reform immigration messaging. The BBC I hold in particular contempt now. Whenever I tune in, I'm most likely greeted by Farage, Tice, Braverman, Truss, almost incomprehensibly of all, the Tufton Street anti-NHS shill, the unelected Kate Andrews. The BBC single-handedly made Farage a major public figure through his record number of appearances on BBC Question Time and regular appearances on every other BBC political show. Where are the Greens? Even more to the point, where are the Lib Dems, a party with 14 times as many MPs as Reform UK Party Limited? In BBC world, it's like the Lib Dems don't exist, the Greens don't exist. And as well as the British media, we now increasingly see Space Karen, Elon Musk, weigh in on British politics when he has little or no knowledge of this country. He shaped his social media platform ex-Twitter, allowing back many hate-promoting figures from the far right that were previously banned for promoting racism, misogyny and violent conflict. But worse than that, Space Karen himself now likes to tweet himself predicting civil war in Britain, or to retweet posts by other malign actors like Lawrence Fox containing disinformation. Then there's this. Musk spreading the right-wing trope that two-tier policing is a thing in Britain. The claim that far-right protesters are selectively arrested while black protesters can do as they please. It's the opposite of the truth. It's a matter of record that black people have faced institutional police racism in the UK through selective stop-and-search arrest for decades. We need the new Labour government to ensure that this misinformation, disinformation and fake news is brought under some sort of control. We already have Ofcom, the Office of Communication, but they've already shown themselves to be useless in clamping down on the rabidly biased far-right channel GB News, who by claiming to be merely an entertainment channel rather than a news channel, avoid Ofcom doing anything about the fact they have Tory MPs interviewing other Tory MPs as part of their news coverage, or have Reform UK Party Limited MPs presenting shows. So why are Ofcom so useless? Well, journalist George Monbiot recently pointed out that the political views of its chairman, Michael Grade, appointed by the Conservatives, might offer a clue. Watching the far-right instigator Lawrence Fox on the BBC's Question Time, Grade said he cheered. I thought, at last, a voice for those of us who are so sick of the intolerance, the woke brigade. Lawrence Fox has done as much as anyone to amplify the recent riots. Yes, the direct perpetrators of this mayhem are the racist thugs rampaging through our cities, and they should face the legal consequences. But let us not forget who helped to whip them up. And let's hope Keir Starmer and his government are brave enough to take on the rabble-rousing fascists on their keyboards, whether they're sitting in Cyprus, Hong Kong or elsewhere.